The chandeliers dripped with diamonds, but beneath their glittering light, deception shimmered brighter. In a ballroom scented with roses and power, where every glance could seal a deal or spark a scandal, Vivienne Devereux Langford moved like a queen among courtiers, unaware that her empire, built on love and illusion, was already burning at its edges. She wore a breathtaking 20-carat diamond necklace, a surprise gift from Julian that very morning, with matching earrings that sparkled under every spotlight as she turned her head. Her Dior heels, custom-made with a lowered arch for comfort during pregnancy, clicked with assurance across the marble flooring as she and Julian moved through the exclusive crowd. The Grand Palais in Paris fell into a hushed awe as Vivienne Devereux Langford, radiant in midnight sapphire Dior and 8 months pregnant, descended the sweeping staircase with regal poise. 500 of fashion's elite turned in stunned silence as she glided toward the stage, where her billionaire husband, Julian Langford, stood frozen mid-speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivienne's voice echoed sharply through the hall, "allow me to introduce you to my husband's mistress. She's been calling herself Celeste Moreau, but her real name is Sabrina Villani, and she's wanted by Interpol for fraud, bigamy, and theft." Screens around the grand hall flickered to life, displaying damning evidence as Julian's meticulously curated world collapsed, right before the eyes of Paris's high society and global fashion media. TV cameras rolled, capturing every gasp and stare. If you loved this moment of righteous exposure, tap like. For more stories of powerful women getting their due justice, subscribe to catch each weekly tale of revenge served ice cold. Earlier that week, the golden glow of Paris Fashion Week bathed the Château de Lumière, where Vivienne adjusted her custom Dior maternity gown. At 28, 6 months pregnant and stunningly composed, she was the embodiment of timeless sophistication. A former French runway icon turned Harvard MBA graduate, Vivienne now held the title of wife to one of the fashion world's most influential tycoons. Her chestnut hair framed her face in effortless waves, and despite the pregnancy, she moved with the ease that once made her the face of every major European campaign. At her side stood Julian Langford, 35, CEO of the Langford Group, a $3.2 billion fashion conglomerate controlling brands from Paris to Seoul. With piercing steel-gray eyes and sculpted cheekbones, Julian's image had graced the covers of Forbes, GQ, and Vanity Fair more than any other fashion CEO in the last decade. Dressed in a bespoke Brioni tuxedo, Julian looked every bit the mogul who rose from obscurity to global dominance. "Ma belle," Julian whispered into Vivienne's ear, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back as camera flashes rained around them. "You look absolutely radiant tonight. Our son is going to be so proud of his beautiful mother." Vivienne's heart fluttered. They had only learned their baby's gender last week, and Julian's joy at the news of a son had felt nothing but sincere. She leaned into his warmth, breathing in his familiar cologne, Maison Francis Kurkdjian Oud Satin Mood, the same scent he wore on their wedding day in Capri 2 years earlier. The red carpet outside the Givenchy show stretched out before them like a river of opulence. "Vivienne, Julian, over here," photographers shouted. "One more kiss, show us the bump." Vivienne's hand moved instinctively to her gently curved belly, where their son stirred with a kick, as if ready to join the world of glitter and betrayal he had been born into. She wore a breathtaking 20-carat diamond necklace, a surprise gift from Julian that very morning, with matching earrings that sparkled under every spotlight as she turned her head. Her Dior heels, custom-made with a lowered arch for comfort during pregnancy, clicked with assurance across the marble flooring as she and Julian moved through the exclusive crowd. Their life resembled something from a fantasy novel, one the public both admired and envied. The Langfords' penthouse, perched high above the Seine with panoramic city views, had cost over €50 million, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and a nursery designed by the world's most coveted interior architect. Weekend getaways to Venice aboard a private jet, shopping sprees in Rue Saint-Honoré where Vivienne returned with armfuls from Hermès, Chanel, and Dior, holidays in their private Seychelles villa, and dinners with diplomats and celebrities alike were all part of their normal. Just last month, Julian had surprised her with a custom Patek Philippe timepiece for her birthday, engraved with the words, to my beautiful wife and the mother of my forever." It had brought tears to her eyes, especially since he'd included a hidden compartment behind the case for their baby's first ultrasound photo. She had held it for hours that evening, touched by the thoughtfulness, imagining Julian as a doting father, the kind who would pace hospital corridors nervously, who would hold their child with trembling reverence. It felt real then, everything they had, everything they were building. But tonight, something felt off. Julian appeared distracted. He kept glancing at his phone between sips of vintage champagne in the VIP lounge. When Vivian asked about it, he gave a dismissive laugh. "Just business, boring merger stuff," he said, then quickly shifted the topic to their upcoming baby moon in Bora Bora. They were soon ushered to the front row, reserved for fashion royalty only. As the lights dimmed and the show prepared to begin, Vivian's gaze wandered across the runway and caught on a woman she didn't recognize. Tall. Incredibly tall, at least 5'10". Her platinum blonde hair shimmered under the lights like molten silver, and her eyes were the piercing blue of a glacier lagoon. She wore a provocative silver gown that clung like liquid metal and offered no mystery. What startled Vivian wasn't just her looks, but her focus. The woman was staring directly at Julian. "Who is that?" Vivian asked, keeping her voice casual as she traced Julian's gaze. "Which one?" Julian replied quickly, a little too quickly, not even bothering to look in the same direction. "The blonde, silver dress. She hasn't stopped looking over here." Julian gave a brief glance, his expression unreadable. "No idea. Probably some influencer trying to stir buzz. You know how they are." But Vivian had been married to Julian long enough to recognize deflection when she heard it. A strange heat crawled up her neck, and for the first time that evening, she felt overdressed, overexposed, like she'd stepped into a room where something had already been decided, and she was only now catching up. Still, she brushed off the discomfort. Maybe she was just being hormonal. Pregnancy had made her hyper-aware, sensitive even, and not everything needed to be a crisis. She took a deep breath as the show opened with a bang. Booming music, dazzling strobes, and models parading down the runway in pieces that pushed fashion's limits. Striding confidently down the catwalk, in designs that defied both gravity and tradition, the models captivated the crowd. Vivian found herself momentarily swept up in the artistry, the rush of it all igniting a flicker of nostalgia. These were the very runways she once dominated. Before she met Julian, she had been a fixture in haute couture. Though she had stepped away from modeling years ago, the magic still pulsed in her blood. Each turn of the models, every daring silhouette, brought back flashes of another life. Camera flashes, applause, the adrenaline of the runway. It felt distant now, like watching someone else's memory through frosted glass, yet the ache in her chest reminded her it had once been hers. As the show paused for intermission, Julian leaned in. "I need to take a couple of quick calls," he whispered. With a soft kiss to her cheek, he slipped away, disappearing into the corridors backstage. Vivian stayed behind, engaged in light conversation with Claire Waite-Keller and Jean-Paul Gaultier about the collection's bold silhouettes. But despite the lively chatter, an uneasy tension hovered just beneath her polished exterior. Something didn't sit right. The room felt louder than before, the lights sharper, her smile tighter. She heard herself laughing at something Gaultier said, but her mind was already elsewhere, following Julian through imagined hallways and conversations. Out of the corner of her eye, she realized the mysterious blonde, the one in the silver dress, was gone too. 20 minutes later, Julian returned. His hair was slightly tousled, and worse, a faint red smudge marked the collar of his white shirt. Vivian knew her lipstick shade, and it wasn't that one. Her stomach clenched, but she held herself together, offering a strained smile as Julian leaned in again. "Sorry, cara mia," he murmured. "That took longer than I thought." The rest of the show drifted past in a blur. Vivian clapped politely when expected, but her mind spun. It could be innocent, she tried to tell herself. In the fashion world, air kisses were routine. Wind could have mussed his hair. But paired with the intense eye contact earlier, and Julian's uncharacteristic distraction, a heavy suspicion began to settle deep in her chest. It sat there like a stone, unmovable and cold. Every carefully constructed justification crumbled beneath the weight of something she didn't want to name yet. dread. After the show, they made their way to the after-party at Villa des Lumières, a magnificent Renaissance estate outside Paris rented for the evening. It was everything the fashion elite expected: gilded opulence, flowing champagne, and guest lists that read like the Met Gala. Vivienne, restricted to sparkling water because of her pregnancy, sipped quietly as Julien made the rounds. He moved through the crowd with his usual charm, effortlessly engaging designers, investors, and celebrities. This was his world, and he commanded it like a born king. But from where she stood, something in his performance felt more like a masquerade. Too smooth, too choreographed, like he was playing a part for an audience she couldn't yet see. Then she saw her, the blonde, no longer in silver, but now in a slinky black Elie Saab dress that clung to her like it had been made just for her body. And she was walking directly toward Julien. Vivienne's breath caught. The woman reached Julien with a practiced smile and slipped her hand onto his arm, a gesture far too intimate for mere acquaintances. She leaned in close, whispered something, and tossed her head back in exaggerated laughter. Julien's demeanor shifted instantly. Gone was the polished businessman. His body language softened. He touched the small of the woman's back, the exact same way he'd touched Vivienne earlier that night. It was muscle memory, thoughtless and familiar, the kind of gesture not born in the moment, but repeated, rehearsed. Vivienne felt a wave of nausea rise, one that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She wove through the crowd with purpose, her heels silent against the marble floor. As she neared, voices broke through the din, fragments of conversation she wasn't meant to hear. "Tomorrow night at the usual spot. I can't wait. She'll never suspect." Vivienne caught the end of the sentence as she drew closer, her pulse hammering. The blonde woman noticed her first, and instead of reacting with guilt or embarrassment, she offered a slow, deliberate smile, one laced with smug satisfaction. "Oh, you must be the wife," she said in accented English, French, perhaps. "I'm Celeste Moreau. I've heard so much about you." Vivienne forced a smile and extended her hand. "Vivienne Langford. And you are?" "Celeste is a model and an emerging designer," Julien cut in, a little too quickly. "We've been discussing ideas for the spring collaboration." But Celeste's expression told a very different story. Her eyes flicked over Vivienne, landing on her baby bump, with barely veiled disdain. "So maternal," she said, making the word sound more like a diagnosis than a compliment. "How wonderful for you." The exchange dragged on for a few excruciating minutes. Julien shifted uncomfortably, while Celeste grew increasingly brazen. She remarked on how hard it must be for Julien with Vivienne being in such a delicate condition. How she was always available to accompany him to business dinners or industry events, if ever needed. Vivienne stood frozen, watching the whole thing like an out-of-body experience. This woman was practically throwing herself at Julien, in front of his wife, and he wasn't stopping her. In fact, he looked almost amused by it. Finally, Celeste excused herself with a smirk. "I need to powder my nose. Lovely to meet you, Madame Langford." As soon as she was out of earshot, Vivienne turned to Julien, her voice low but brimming with fury. "What the hell was that?" Julien blinked. "What do you mean?" "That woman was openly flirting with you, in front of me. And you let it happen." "She's a business contact, Vivienne," he said, avoiding eye contact. "I was being polite." "Polite?" Vivienne's voice sharpened. "She practically offered to be your escort while I'm pregnant, and you didn't even blink." Julien's face darkened. "You're overreacting, paranoid, hormonal." The words landed like a slap. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he continued. "You making a scene. Maybe it's best if you went back to the hotel and rested." For a moment, Vivienne couldn't speak. In 2 years of marriage, Julien had never spoken to her like this, cold, dismissive. Like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Fine," she said quietly, her voice tight with emotion. "I'll go. Clearly, I'm not welcome here." She turned to leave, but Julien reached out and caught her arm. For a fleeting second, she thought he might apologize, explain, be the man she had married. Instead, he leaned in close and whispered, "Don't make a scene, Vivienne. There are too many important people here." The ride back to the Four Seasons George Futh was a blur of glittering lights and silent tears. Vivienne sat quietly in the back seat of their private car, staring out at the illuminated avenues of Paris, her reflection faintly visible in the glass as the city sped past. Each glowing street lamp passed like a silent witness to her unraveling world. The city she loved suddenly feeling unfamiliar and cold. Her world felt like it was coming apart, yet she kept trying to find some way to make it all make sense. To explain what she'd seen. To believe that maybe it was just business, just misunderstanding. But the mounting evidence left less and less room for doubt. She clung to rationality like a lifeline, replaying Julian's excuses over and over, trying to twist them into something that didn't break her heart. Back in their sprawling presidential suite, complete with Carrara marble baths and silk-draped windows overlooking the Eiffel Tower, Vivienne changed into her ivory silk pajamas and tried calling Julian. Straight to voicemail. She tried again an hour later. Still nothing. By 2 a.m., Vivienne was seated by the massive window, hands resting protectively over her belly, speaking softly to her unborn son. "Your daddy's going through something, baby," she whispered. "But mommy's going to protect you, always." Her voice cracked, the whisper barely more than breath, as she fought to keep from dissolving completely. She rubbed slow circles on her belly, grounding herself in the one truth that still mattered, her child. That's when her phone buzzed. An Instagram notification from a popular fashion blogger. She clicked it without thinking, then froze. In a video from that very night's after-party, the camera briefly panned over a corner of the ballroom, and there they were, Julian and Celeste, standing close, too close, their heads bent together in intimate conversation, her hand on his chest, his gaze fixed on her with familiarity that sent ice through Vivienne's veins. This wasn't business. Vivienne screenshot the frame and with trembling fingers began searching Celeste Moreau online. The results came fast, and with them, dread. Image after image of Celeste attending elite galas, rubbing shoulders with CEOs and European royals. Article after article about her suspiciously fast rise in fashion. But what caught Vivienne's eye were the background details. Tiny clues. Julian was there too, in the background of a gala photo in Venice, half visible behind her at a launch party in Berlin. And then, the final blow. A paparazzi photo from 2 weeks ago. Julian had told Vivienne he was in London for meetings. She'd even texted him good night from her prenatal yoga class. But the photo showed him at Le Bernardin in New York, seated at a candlelit table with Celeste, leaning in close over wine and oysters. Vivienne's hands began to shake. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was an affair. Ongoing, calculated, hidden from her while she'd been preparing for motherhood, planning their nursery, protecting their future. The betrayal hit with brutal clarity, not just emotional, but strategic. Every moment she'd spent dreaming of family, he had been investing in deceit. The baby kicked hard, as if he too sensed the storm unraveling around them. Vivienne placed both hands over her belly and whispered through clenched teeth, "Mommy's going to find out the truth, little one. And if Daddy has betrayed us, he'll never get the chance to hurt us again." She picked up her phone and dialed the only person she could fully trust, her best friend, Giulia Santini, a high-powered divorce attorney in Rome. Despite the hour, Giulia answered on the second ring. "Vivienne, what happened?" Through choked breaths, Vivienne began to explain, but even as she spoke, her mind was already moving. If Julian thought he could treat her like yesterday's collection, used, discarded, forgotten, then he was about to discover exactly who he had underestimated. The tears hadn't stopped, but they no longer tasted of helplessness. They tasted of fury, of resolve. The fairy tale was over, but Vivienne Devereux Langford was just getting started. Her call with Giulia lasted until sunrise. Vivienne sat curled up in the plush armchair of their presidential suite, its silk upholstery warm under the morning light. Through the tall windows, she watched the sun rise slowly over the Paris skyline, casting golden reflections across the Seine. Across from her, Giulia paced methodically, speaking with the clear, clipped cadence of a seasoned attorney. Giulia had been Vivienne's roommate back at Harvard Business School, and though their careers had taken them down different paths, Vivienne to fashion, Giulia to law, their friendship had only grown deeper with time. "Vivienne, listen to me," Giulia said firmly, her voice laced with focus. "Before you make any decisions, any at all, we need to gather evidence. If Julian's having an affair, if he's hiding assets, we need documentation that holds up in court." Vivienne let out a shaky breath, one hand pressed gently to her bump. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. How did I not see this? There were signs. Don't, Julia snapped, softening only slightly. You're not stupid, you're pregnant, and you trusted your husband. That's what anyone would have done. But now we have to think. Has anything changed financially? Unusual bank activity? New accounts? Vivian blinked, thinking back. Yes, actually. He's been receiving mail from banks I didn't recognize, and a few weeks ago he said he was restructuring some investments, for tax reasons. He asked me to sign some papers. I didn't really read them. I trusted him. Julia let out a slow breath, sharp and controlled. Please tell me you kept copies. They're in the safe at the penthouse. All of our important documents are. Good, Julia said. When you get back to New York, the first thing we're going to do is photograph every page in that safe. If Julian is planning to cut you off, he's likely moved assets into accounts you can't reach. He's trying to secure his money before he walks. Vivian's stomach turned. All those investment restructures hadn't been for taxes at all. They'd been calculated steps in a quiet betrayal. At 7 a.m., she heard the beep of the keycard in the door. Julian. Vivian quickly wiped her face and curled onto the couch, feigning sleep. Through barely opened eyelids, she watched him enter the suite. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. But what struck her most was the look on his face, satisfaction, a calm smugness in his posture that made her chest tighten. He didn't glance at her, didn't check on her. He just walked straight to the ensuite bathroom and turned on the shower. Vivian lay still, her pulse pounding. 20 minutes passed. Later, Julian stepped out of the bathroom, fresh, polished, and composed, as if the night before had never happened. Vivian kept up her act, still curled on the couch, breathing evenly, eyes closed. She heard him moving about the suite and then speaking quietly on the phone, in Italian, a language he believed she couldn't follow well enough to catch the subtleties. He was wrong. Vivian had spent 2 years living in Milan during her modeling career. She understood every word. Celeste, amore, last night was incredible, he murmured into the phone. I can't wait until this charade is over and we can finally be together, openly. Vivian's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't move. No, she suspects nothing, Julian continued, laughing softly. The pregnancy just makes her emotional, paranoid. But it actually helps us. Soon, Bella. Very soon. The lawyers say 1 more month to finalize the asset transfers. Then we file. She'll get what the law requires, nothing more. Each word carved into Vivian like glass. She lay motionless, her heart fracturing silently. But she needed to hear it all. The penthouse will be yours, obviously, and the Normandy house. I've already had my assistant look into Swiss boarding schools for the baby. Best in Europe. Excellent reputations. Kids are resilient. He paused, then added with casual cruelty, honestly, Vivian was never going to be much of a mother anyway. Too self-absorbed, Vivian nearly gasped. Not because of the insult, but because of how effortlessly he dismissed their unborn child, as if their son was an obstacle, an inconvenience to be managed. She gripped the armrest tightly, nails digging into the silk, forcing herself not to move. I have to go, Julian said at last. The grieving husband routine continues. I'm taking her to breakfast. Pretend I care. But tonight, once we're back in New York, come to the penthouse around midnight. She takes those pregnancy sleeping pills. Out like a light. The call ended. She heard Julian moving through the suite, getting dressed, his voice humming softly like nothing had happened. Then a gentle hand on her shoulder. Buongiorno, Bella, he whispered, laced with false tenderness. How are you feeling? I was worried about you last night. Vivian slowly opened her eyes, forcing a sleepy smile. She looked up at the man she had once loved more than life itself, and for the first time she saw him with perfect clarity. The same sculpted face that had once made her heart flutter now appeared cold, manipulative. Those steel-gray eyes that had once felt like home now looked like glass. I'm fine, she said softly. Just tired. The baby was very active. Last night? Poor thing, Julian murmured as his hand brushed over Vivian's belly. What might have once felt like a loving gesture now felt invasive, like a stranger touching something sacred. She stiffened slightly, masking it with a tight smile, unwilling to let him see just how deeply the gesture unsettled her now. The intimacy had been replaced with calculation, and her body knew it before her mind did. We should get you some breakfast. Keep your strength up, he added smoothly. An hour later, they sat in the hotel's elegant dining room, surrounded by soft jazz and gold leaf trim. Vivienne picked at her croissant in silence, mechanically swallowing bites she barely tasted. Across from her, Julian played the part of the attentive husband with flawless precision. He smiled at the waiter, refilled her water glass, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, all things he used to do out of love. But now, each gesture felt rehearsed, like he was checking boxes on a script written to maintain appearances. He asked about her sleep, her comfort, whether she wanted to stay in Paris longer to relax. To anyone watching, they looked like the picture-perfect couple, wealthy, beautiful, expecting their first child. But Vivienne wasn't fooled anymore. Every word, every glance, every hand on her back, it was all performance. She studied him like an academic subject under glass, watching, measuring, trying to understand how she had ever once thought this man was capable of love. She wondered when it had all changed, or if he had simply never loved her at all. The thought burned bitter and corrosive, somewhere between heartbreak and rage. The flight back to New York was its own private hell. Julian spent all 7 hours buried in his laptop, typing endlessly, handling business, he claimed. Vivienne stared out the window in silence, her mind racing with Julia's words. Document everything. Gather evidence. Don't tip your hand. Not yet. When they returned to their Fifth Avenue penthouse, Vivienne waited until Julian left for the office before acting. As soon as the elevator doors closed behind him, she headed straight for the safe. Her hands trembled as she entered the code. Inside, she found the papers she'd signed weeks earlier, contracts she had barely skimmed at the time, trusting him. Now she read every word, and nearly collapsed. They weren't about tax restructuring. They were calculated asset transfers, stripping her name off nearly everything they owned. The penthouse, the Normandy estate, their priceless art collection, even jewelry he'd gifted her. Everything had been moved to shell corporations that Julian controlled alone. Vivienne's chest tightened as she photographed every single document with her phone. Her heart pounded. Her fingers shook with fury. And yet, the worst was still to come. Beneath the stack of financial documents was a slim folder marked personal. Inside, photos. Dozens of them. Julian and Celeste, smiling at rooftop dinners, embracing on weekend trips, kissing in what looked like hotel rooms. And in more than one photo, Celeste wore jewelry Vivienne recognized. Pieces Julian had reported as stolen from his office safe 3 months ago. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the deception in every detail. The jewelry he claimed had vanished, the fake concern, the gaslighting. It was all part of a script he'd written without her consent. But the final image nearly knocked the air from her lungs. Celeste, naked, except for Vivienne's wedding necklace, a family heirloom from Julian's grandmother. She lay on the bed at the Normandy estate, posed seductively, holding a positive pregnancy test. Vivienne stared, heart stopped. Celeste was pregnant, or was this some twisted performance? Either way, the message was chillingly clear. Julian wasn't just cheating, he was replacing her, erasing her piece by piece and laying the blueprint for a new life without her in it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Julian. Working late tonight, don't wait up, love you. The casual deceit in Julian's text made Vivienne want to scream. Instead, she exhaled slowly, hands trembling, and returned every document and photo back into the safe with meticulous care, exactly as she'd found them. Then she picked up her phone and called Julia. I have the evidence, she said the moment her friend answered. It's worse than we thought. Vivienne spent the next hour forwarding encrypted files, photos, contracts, transfers to Julia's secure legal account. Her friend's sharp intakes of breath and occasional muttered curses punctuated the silence. Finally, Julia spoke, voice tight and laced with fury. Vivienne, this isn't just infidelity. This is large-scale financial fraud. Julian has been systematically draining your marital assets while planning to abandon you, and if that pregnancy test photo is recent, he's planning to have 2 families, Vivienne finished, or he thought leaving me for a pregnant mistress would cut down his obligations in the divorce. Julia's tone sharpened. Either way, we have him, dead to rights. But Vivienne, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't confront him. Don't let him know you know. We need more time. If he realizes you're aware, he might speed up his timeline or bury more of the assets. Vivienne's chest tightened, but she nodded. I promise. And so began the most excruciating 3 weeks of her life. She became a ghost inside her own life, performing her role as the devoted wife. She smiled at charity galas on Julian's arm, posed for cameras, even helped plan their lavish baby shower. But behind the facade, she was working in lockstep with Julia and a 5-person team of private investigators. They tracked shell companies, mapped hidden accounts. Most importantly, they began digging into Celeste Moreau's past. What they found blew everything wide open. Celeste Moreau didn't exist. The woman in their photos, the one sleeping with Vivienne's husband, was actually Sarah Delacroix, a 24-year-old con artist from Marseille with a record stretching across Europe. She'd been married 3 times under different aliases, each time to older, wealthy men. Each time, she vanished with chunks of their fortunes. And she was still legally married to her 3rd husband, a 70-year-old French industrialist who believed she was in New York modeling and planned to return home in 6 months. She's not just an adulteress, Julia explained during a covert meeting. She's a bigamist, a professional scammer. And the pregnancy test? Fake. She'd used the same false pregnancy con in all 3 previous marriages. The investigators confirmed it. Vivienne listened in silence, her emotions cold and precise. Julian had thought he was being clever, but he'd fallen for the oldest scam in the book. Then came the final piece, the one that would shatter everything. Marco Santini, one of the investigators, had successfully planted listening devices in several locations Julian and Sarah frequented. The recordings were shocking. In one particularly damning clip, recorded at the St. Regis Hotel, Julian's voice rang out clearly. "Once the baby's born, I'll file for divorce." On the recording, Julian's voice came through with chilling calm. "My lawyers say I can argue that her pregnancy hormones have made her mentally unstable. That'll help with custody. The kid goes to boarding school as soon as he's old enough, and Vivienne will be out of our lives forever." Then came Sarah's voice, clear, smug, cruel. "Are you sure she suspects nothing?" Julian chuckled. "Please. Vivienne's stunning, but she's not exactly clever. She signs whatever I give her. By the time she figures out what's going on, everything will be locked up in shell companies she can't touch." "What about a prenup?" "What prenup?" Julian scoffed. "I didn't make her sign one. I thought I'd be with her forever. But then I met you, mon amour. Don't worry, my lawyers found loopholes. She'll get the bare legal minimum. Nothing more." Vivienne sat in Julia's office, listening to the recording with one hand, protectively resting on her 8-month pregnant belly. Her son was due in 4 weeks, and Julian was already planning to rip him away, ship him off to a boarding school like some burden to be managed. The cruelty of it, of treating their unborn child like a logistical problem, made her stomach turn. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. That was it. She exhaled slowly, her voice steady and razor-sharp. "I'm done playing games." Gone was the hurt, the disbelief, the denial. What remained was something far colder, resolve forged in betrayal. Julia looked up. "What do you want to do?" Vivienne's eyes were steel. "I want to destroy him, publicly, completely, permanently. And I know exactly how." She reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. On the screen, a gilded invitation. Julian was hosting a charity gala next week at the Grand Palais in Paris, an opulent affair with over 500 of fashion's elite, including titans of industry and global media. The event would be broadcast live on fashion TV. Julia leaned forward, her lips curving into a dangerous smile. "You want to expose him there?" Vivienne nodded once. "Exactly there, in front of everyone who matters, with cameras rolling. I want his fall to be as public as his rise." Her tone was icily measured, but her eyes blazed. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice. For herself. For her son. Julia met her gaze. "Vivienne, are you sure? Once this happens, there's no walking it back." Vivienne placed both hands on her belly, feeling the strong, rhythmic kicks of her unborn son. "Julia," she said quietly, "they were planning to steal my child and throw him into some cold Swiss dorm like excess luggage. Julian has drained my accounts, violated my trust, and tried to erase me from my own life." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with barely restrained fury. Her voice grew firmer. "Now it's my turn. I thought I was going crazy," Vivienne said. "I'm not sure of anything anymore, except this. He's going to pay." As she left Julia's office that afternoon, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: power. For too long she'd been Julian's perfect wife, elegant, obedient, trusting, but that was over. She hadn't just been a supermodel and a Harvard MBA for show. She had built her own brand before Julian had even bought his first tailored suit. Now he was going to learn exactly what happened when you betrayed Vivienne Devereux Langford. The Grand Palais had been transformed into a glittering cathedral of high society for Julian Langford's annual charity gala. Crystal chandeliers scattered rainbow light across polished marble floors. 500 of the world's most powerful figures in fashion, tech, and finance mingled beneath priceless art installations. The theme was timeless elegance, and no cost had been spared. White roses flown in from Ecuador, vintage Dom Perignon flowed freely. A string quartet from the Vienna Philharmonic played Mozart beneath a golden rotunda. Julian stood at the heart of it all, radiating power in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that cost more than most luxury sedans. At 35, he was at the peak of his career and influence, and tonight was supposed to be his triumphant moment. The gala wasn't just about charity. It was his stage, his moment to unveil the next chapter. He planned to announce his engagement to Celeste Moreau, sealing his transformation from respected family man to fashion's most eligible bachelor. Celeste drifted through the crowd like a serpent in silk, wearing a daring red eelskin gown that clung to every curve. Her platinum hair was sculpted into a flawless updo, and around her neck hung a ruby necklace, suspiciously similar to one Julian had claimed had gone missing from Vivienne's private collection months earlier. To the crowd, Celeste looked every bit the ideal socialite, young, glamorous, untouchable. Vivienne, however, was nowhere to be seen. Julian had told guests she was on bed rest for her pregnancy. He played the part of the concerned husband, privately relieved that his emotional wife wouldn't be cramping his carefully curated spotlight. What he didn't know was that Vivienne was already in the building. She had arrived an hour earlier through the staff entrance, her baby bump concealed beneath a simple black wool coat. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup minimal. No jewelry, no heels, just quiet determination. Alessandro Marchetti, CEO of Marchetti Media Group and Julian's fiercest competitor, had arranged press credentials for her under the alias of a fashion magazine journalist. No one even looked twice as she passed through security. Vivienne made her way to the museum's private research library, a quiet, elevated space with sweeping views of the main hall. From behind the glass she watched, every guest, every camera, every flash of arrogance from the man who thought he'd erased her. Julia stood beside Vivienne, her hand steady on her friend's shoulder. Flanking them were Marco Santini and two FBI agents, now deeply invested in Julian's web of financial deceit. The mountain of evidence Vivienne had uncovered had turned what began as a personal betrayal into a potential federal case. "Are you ready for this?" Julia asked, her voice low but resolute. Vivienne didn't answer immediately. She gazed down through the glass of the Grand Palais Research Gallery, where Julian moved among the elite, flashing his signature grin, shaking hands, charming donors, basking in the glow of his own mythology. Her heart felt like ice, but her resolve was fire. "He's been planning to ruin my life for months," she whispered. "I'm more than ready to return the favor." At 9 p.m. sharp, Julian ascended the small, spotlighted stage in front of the central exhibition, a glowing marble atrium where the press and guests gathered with anticipation. The chatter died down as the lights dimmed and Julian's voice rang out across the vaulted chamber. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his practiced charisma on full display. "Thank you all for being here tonight for what I promise will be an unforgettable evening." Vivienne heard that voice and remembered every lie it had ever told her. Tonight, she would replace all of them with the truth. Julian continued, "Before we resume tonight's festivities, I'd like to make a personal announcement. As many of you know, this past year has brought profound changes to my life." That was her cue. Vivienne stood, one hand on the microphone controls. Alessandro's tech team had rigged the AV system earlier, using her official press credentials to grant her full access to the Palais Sound Network. She pressed the button. "Excuse me." The voice echoed through the Grand Palais like thunder. Julian froze mid-sentence. The crowd stirred in confusion. Heads turned. Vivienne's voice rang out again, calm, cold, clear. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake." 100 phones lifted. Whispers cascaded like dominoes through the hall. Julian went visibly pale, his eyes scanning the crowd for the voice he recognized and feared. "You see," she continued, "the man on that stage told you his wife was home, on bed rest. That's just one of many lies Julian Langford has been telling all of you." Vivienne emerged from the shadows atop the grand staircase, her coat gone, revealing a breathtaking midnight blue Valentino gown. Her 8-month baby bump was proudly visible, framed by the soft cascade of her dark hair and a glowing complexion. Around her neck, the family heirloom necklace, the same one Celeste had desecrated in those photos. Gasps swept through the crowd like a shockwave. Fashion editors, business moguls, celebrities, all of them turned to face the woman they had believed too fragile to attend. They were about to learn the truth, and so was the world. Camera phones rose like a wave, and Vivienne could see the fashion TV cameras swiveling sharply to capture her grand entrance. "Vivienne," Julian called out, his voice tight, desperate for composure. "Darling, what are you doing here? You should be resting." Vivienne let out a cold, humorless laugh as she began descending the staircase with regal poise. "Oh, Julian," she said, her voice steady and razor-sharp. "I've been resting. Resting while I discovered you've been having an affair. Resting while I realized you've stolen millions from our accounts. Resting while I learned that your beautiful girlfriend isn't who she claims to be." Each word dropped like stone into a still pond, the ripples spreading through the stunned crowd. Her gaze never wavered, locked on the man who had once sworn to love her. In the crowd, Sarah, posing as Celeste, had frozen in place. But when she began edging toward the exit, Alessandro's security team moved swiftly, blocking her path. Her confident mask cracked for the first time, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Vivienne reached the bottom of the staircase, moving with quiet authority as the glittering crowd parted around her. The assembled elite, Anna Wintour, Giorgio Armani, CEOs from the biggest luxury houses, influencers, world leaders, watched, transfixed, as one of fashion's most powerful couples unraveled in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivienne said clearly, stepping up to the stage, "allow me to introduce my husband's mistress, known to you as Celeste Moreau, but her real name is Sarah Delacca, and she's wanted by Interpol for fraud, bigamy, and theft." Suddenly, the massive screen circling the Grand Palais came to life. Identification documents, Interpol red notices, police records from France, Switzerland, and Monaco flashed across the displays, alongside photos of Sarah with previous victims. Gasps echoed through the room as her web of deception was projected 20 feet high. Vivienne had spent weeks with Julia and Marco compiling this evidence, every frame precise, legally vetted, and devastating. "Sarah here," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each sentence, "has been married 3 times under different names. She is currently still married to a 70-year-old French industrialist who believes she's modeling in New York." There was no tremble in her voice now, only fire. She turned toward Sarah. "But what you've really been modeling is a talent for draining bank accounts, including my husband's." Julian stepped forward, trying to seize the mic. "Vivienne, you're clearly having some kind of emotional breakdown. The pregnancy, it's made you paranoid and delusional." He turned to security. "Escort my wife off the—" "Security isn't going anywhere," Vivienne snapped, her eyes blazing, "and neither am I. Not until every person here knows exactly who you are." The room crackled with tension as Vivienne stood her ground, her presence now larger than any scandal. The screens changed again. This time, they showed bank statements, shell corporations, and asset transfers, a paper trail of betrayal. Vivienne narrated calmly, her hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. "While I was planning our baby's nursery," she said, "Julian was stealing our child's inheritance. While I was choosing names for our son, Julian was choosing Swiss boarding schools to keep him out of the way." Her voice wavered, only slightly, but the heartbreak behind the strength was unmistakable. The room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that only comes before a reckoning. Every eye in the Grand Palais was fixed on Vivienne. Anna Wintour had her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Giorgio Armani stood frozen, shaking his head in disbelief. Even the waitstaff had stopped serving, silent, captivated. But Vivienne wasn't done. The screens changed again, this time revealing surveillance photos captured by Marco's team, Julian and Sarah, in intimate poses, plotting, scheming to strip Vivienne of her assets, discussing how to minimize her divorce payout and gain custody of her unborn child. And just so there's no confusion about the timeline, Vivienne's voice was ice. Here are photos of Julian and Sarah together 8 months ago. She turned to the crowd. Yes, 8 months. My husband began cheating on me when I was 3 months pregnant with his child. Then the audio began to play. Julian's voice echoed through the hall, clear, undeniable, horrifying. She's emotional, hormonal. The lawyers say we can use that to get custody. Sarah's laughter, cruel and high-pitched, followed. The jewelry is probably in her safe. We'll just say it was misplaced. Then, the kid will go to boarding school as soon as he's old enough. Vivienne will be out of our lives forever. A visceral silence followed. These were people who worshipped family legacy, who built dynasties and honored bloodlines. To hear Julian Langford discard his own child like a logistical nuisance was unforgivable. Sarah cracked. Lies, she screamed, her French accent growing thick with panic. She's crazy, a pregnant woman who can't accept the truth. Julian doesn't love her anymore. Is it lies? Vivienne asked calmly. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. The giant displays around the palais lit up again, this time with a video Vivienne had saved from Milan Fashion Week. It showed Julian and Sarah in bed, half naked. Sarah was wearing Vivienne's missing necklace. The two of them laughed, mocking the stupid pregnant wife who'd never suspect a thing. The crowd's shock turned to disgust, then rage. These were not people who tolerated deception. Julian had worn the mask of a loyal husband for years, and now they had seen the truth, live in high definition. Vivienne took a breath and raised a manila envelope. I have an announcement of my own, she said. She stepped forward. Julian Langford, you're being served. Gasps swept the room. I'm requesting 60% of all marital assets, full custody of our son, $10 million a year in alimony, and punitive damages for fraud and emotional abuse. A beat of silence, then applause erupted. Anna Wintour stood up first, then Armani, then everyone. The elite of the fashion world, once Julian's allies, rose to their feet, clapping for Vivienne, condemning Julian. But Vivienne wasn't done. She turned, addressing the woman still trying to slink toward the exit. Oh, and Sarah? The room quieted again. You might want to call your husband in France. It seems the authorities in France are very interested in speaking with you about your recent financial activities. As if on cue, 2 FBI agents entered the Grand Palais, moving swiftly through the stunned crowd towards Sarah Delacroix. The charges read aloud included fraud, identity theft, and violations of immigration laws tied to her international marriage scams. Julian Langford stood alone on the stage, his carefully curated world crumbling in real time. The man who once controlled billions, who had charmed heads of state and ruled fashion's upper echelon, was now exposed as a fraud, a coward, a fool. He stepped down from the stage, abandoning any trace of dignity. Vivienne, he pleaded, approaching her like a broken man. Please, we can fix this. I made mistakes, but we can work it out. Think about our son. Vivienne looked at him. This man she had once loved more than life itself. She felt nothing. No, Julian, she said quietly, so only he could hear. After what you did, after what you planned to do to him, you'll be lucky if I let you see him at all. And if I do, it'll be under supervision. The cameras captured everything. The once proud titan of industry on his knees, begging for forgiveness that would never come. Behind them, Sarah was being led away in handcuffs, still shouting about her innocence as evidence of her crimes rolled across the hall's towering screens. But Vivienne stood tall, one hand on her belly, where her son kicked as if sensing his mother's triumph. She had entered this marriage as a woman in love, trusting, hopeful. She was leaving it as a force of nature. Vivienne turned and picked up the microphone Julian had dropped. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice clear, strong, unshaken, thank you for witnessing the truth tonight. I hope you'll remember this moment. She paused, scanning the room. The next time someone tells you that pregnant women are weak or helpless. She smiled. We're not. We're protecting the future, and we will fight anyone who threatens it. The standing ovation was immediate, thunderous. Vivienne Devereux Langford had just delivered the performance of a lifetime, and every person in that grand hall knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. As Sarah was escorted out and Julian's business allies began to distance themselves, Vivienne turned, her chin high, and she walked out of the Grand Palais into the Parisian night, undefeated. She had entered as a victim, but she was leaving as a victor, and the world would never see her as anything less again. 3 months later, Vivienne Devereux Langford stood in the sun-drenched nursery of her newly restored villa in Tuscany, cradling her 3-week-old son, Leonardo Devereux. The baby was perfect, alert, healthy, and already bearing her intelligent brown eyes and a head of dark hair. The villa, an 18th-century estate nestled among rolling vineyards, had been her first major purchase after the divorce was finalized. It was quiet, safe, and entirely hers. The legal battle had been swift and brutal. Thanks to the mountain of evidence Vivienne presented at the gala, Julian's lawyers advised him to settle quickly and avoid the public spectacle of a trial. The final deal exceeded even Julia's boldest demands. Vivienne received 65% of the marital estate, totaling $1.8 billion, full custody of Leonardo, supervised visits only for Julian, and full control of all companies illegally transferred to offshore accounts. Julian Langford, once worth over $3 billion, was left with just enough to maintain a modest lifestyle in the Hamptons. More devastating than the money, though, was what he had lost forever: his reputation. The gala footage had gone viral, viewed over 100 million times across social media. No luxury house or investment firm would touch him. Once the crowned king of fashion, he was now unemployable. Sarah Delacroix, exposed as a serial fraudster, had been extradited to France, where she was now serving a 5-year sentence for fraud and bigamy. More charges awaited her in Monaco and Dubai, thanks to other victims who came forward after Vivienne's public reveal. The woman who once seduced billionaires was now pressing license plates for 20 cents an hour. But Vivienne's story was never just about revenge. It was about reinvention. With her new freedom and fortune, she launched the Devereux Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting women escaping abusive relationships and providing legal aid to victims of financial manipulation. She also took over Langford Industries, rebranding it as Devereux Enterprises, and launched a sweeping overhaul: ethical labor sourcing, transparent manufacturing, a revolutionary profit-sharing model for employees. Under her leadership, the company's stock rose by 40%, and investors rallied behind her vision of sustainable, people-centered capitalism. The fashion world, once scandalized, now embraced her as a pioneer. She graced the covers of Vogue, Forbes, and Time, not as a billionaire's wife, but as a self-made leader, a mother, and a force of change. Her story had already inspired thousands of women to stand up against financial abuse and emotional betrayal. She had become a symbol of quiet strength, of what it meant to fight back with grace, intelligence, and power. On this particular sunlit morning in Tuscany, Vivienne was expecting a guest: Alessandro Marchetti. Their partnership had begun professionally, but over the months since the Paris Gala, something deeper had grown between them. Alessandro had proven himself to be everything Julian never was: honest, supportive, and genuinely interested in Vivienne. Not as a trophy, but as a woman, a mother, and a leader. The sound of a car crunching up the gravel path signaled his arrival. Vivienne looked down at Leonardo, asleep in her arms. His lashes fluttered against his cheeks, and he clutched one tiny fist to his heart. "Uncle Alessandro is here, little one," she whispered. "He's been very good to us." Moments later, Alessandro appeared in the nursery doorway, his tall, broad frame silhouetted in the morning light. At 38, he carried a quiet elegance. Silver dusted his temples, and the soft lines around his eyes spoke of genuine warmth. He held a small wrapped gift, and moved with care so as not to wake the baby. "He's grown since last week," Alessandro said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. "He's going to be tall, like his mother." Vivienne smiled. Alessandro never once mentioned Leonardo's resemblance to Julian, though it was there, unmistakably. Instead, he treated Leonardo with gentle affection, always focused on the child's future rather than his past. "I brought him something," Alessandro said, holding out the package. "It's never too early to start thinking about education." Vivienne unwrapped the gift delicately. Inside was a leather-bound first edition of The Little Prince in Italian. She opened the cover and read the handwritten inscription: "For Leonardo, may you always see with your heart, Uncle Alessandro." Vivienne blinked back tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "He'll treasure it." They sat in companionable silence, watching the baby sleep. This, peace, affection, respect, was what Vivienne had never found with Julian. Not in all the mansions, nor with all the diamonds. She had finally found what she'd always deserved. "I have some updates on the New York expansion," Alessandro said eventually, pulling out his tablet. "The Fifth Avenue flagship is ahead of schedule, and the sustainable luxury line? Pre-orders are through the roof." Vivienne scanned the projections and smiled. Devereux Enterprises wasn't just surviving without Julian Langford. It was thriving. It was thriving. Vivienne's decision to center ethical fashion and radical transparency had struck a chord with modern consumers, people who no longer just bought luxury, but demanded integrity from the brands they supported. "There's something else," Alessandro said, his voice shifting to a more serious tone. "I got a call yesterday. From Julian's lawyer." Vivienne's expression sharpened immediately. "What does he want now?" "Apparently, Julian's having financial difficulties." Alessandro replied. "The lawyer asked if you'd consider increasing his alimony or allowing him to sell off assets from Leonardo's trust." Vivienne laughed, short and cold. "Financial difficulties? He has more than enough to live comfortably, if he doesn't blow it on yachts and egos." "The answer is absolutely not." "I told them you'd say that," Alessandro said, smirking. "But that's not all. Julian's engaged." Vivienne blinked. That she hadn't expected. "To who?" "Some 23-year-old socialite from Los Angeles. Family money. He's apparently telling people the marriage failed because you were mentally unstable during the pregnancy." A flicker of old anger sparked in Vivienne's chest, but it faded almost immediately. "Let him lie. The whole world saw what happened at the gala," she said evenly. "Anyone who believes his version after that is welcome to him." "The wedding's next month," Alessandro added. "Very small. Beverly Hills. Seems he's learned to stay away from spectacle." Vivienne adjusted Leonardo gently in her arms. Where once there had been love, then rage, now there was simply nothing. Julian Langford was a footnote, relevant only because of the twice-monthly visits the court allowed him with their son. "I hope she makes him happy," Vivienne said. She was surprised to realize she meant it. Maybe a woman who actually wants to be with him will inspire him to be better. Alessandro studied her face. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do," she said with a small smile. "I wasted 2 years of my life on someone who never deserved me. Then I spent months furious about it. But anger is exhausting, and I have better things to use my energy on." As if on cue, Leonardo stirred in her arms, blinking his wide, intelligent eyes. At 3 weeks old, he was already curious, already watching the world with quiet fascination. Vivienne looked down at him and felt that familiar surge of fierce, unshakable love. "This little boy," she said softly, "is going to grow up knowing his worth. He's going to see how a woman should be treated by watching how the men in his life treat me." She looked at Alessandro. "And he's going to learn how to love from the right kind of man." Alessandro reached out, brushing a soft kiss to Leonardo's forehead. "I'll do my best," he whispered. Outside, the Tuscan sun warmed the stone courtyard as the vines swayed gently in the breeze. Inside, a new chapter had begun, and Vivienne Devereux knew it would be her strongest one yet. "To know that integrity and honesty are more valuable than money or power," Vivienne said softly. Alessandro reached across the chair and gently brushed Leonardo's tiny hand. "He's lucky to have you as his mother." "We're both lucky," Vivienne corrected, smiling. "I never would have found my strength if Julian hadn't forced me to. In a strange way, I should thank him for showing me what I'm capable of." Her voice held no bitterness, only clarity. The kind that comes after surviving a storm and stepping into sunlight. In the weeks that followed, Vivienne's new life continued to blossom. The Devereux Foundation opened its first residential center for women and children escaping domestic abuse, equipped with legal aid, job training, childcare, and mental health services. Vivienne had overseen every detail, drawing from her own experience to build not just a shelter, but a sanctuary where women could rebuild their lives with dignity. Each brick, each chosen paint color, felt personal, an echo of the safety she once needed but never had. Devereux Enterprises expanded into sustainable fine jewelry, partnering with ethical diamond suppliers and recycled goldsmiths. Investors once wary of her leadership were now praising her transparency, innovation, and deep sense of purpose. Vivienne had proven, decisively, that doing good and doing well were not mutually exclusive. But perhaps the most profound change was personal. Her relationship with Alessandro had grown gently, without pressure or pretense, rooted in friendship, mutual respect, and the shared values that had always mattered most to her. He had never asked for more than she was ready to give. He had never tried to possess or control. Instead, he offered what she'd never had with Julian: patience, kindness, authenticity, the simple, unwavering presence of someone who saw her, not as a trophy, not as a liability, but as a whole person. One evening, as the Tuscan sun bathed the villa's terrace in gold and lavender light, Alessandro turned to her with quiet certainty. "Vivienne," he said, his voice low and steady, "I know it's still early, and I don't want to rush anything, but I need you to know how I feel, about you, and about both of you." She looked at him, at the man who had stood by her through chaos and healing, and waited. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because you're beautiful, though you are. Not because you're powerful, though that doesn't hurt. I love you because you're the strongest, most principled person I've ever met. I love watching you with Leonardo. I love that you've turned your pain into purpose. I love the way you wake up every morning ready to change the world." Vivienne blinked against sudden tears. This was love, real love. Not the grand, hollow gestures Julian had made, but a quiet recognition of her soul. It felt like the first time in her life she was being loved, not in spite of her strength, but because of it. "I love you too," she whispered, taking his hand. "But I need you to understand something. Leonardo will always come first. I will never again let a man make me choose between my child and my happiness." Alessandro nodded, his hand tightening gently around hers. "Then I'll just have to make sure you never have to choose." They sat in peaceful silence, watching as the sun dipped below the hills. For the first time in years, Vivienne didn't feel like she was starting over. She felt like she was finally home. "I wouldn't want it any other way," Alessandro replied softly. "That little boy is part of you, which makes him part of us. I want to help you raise him, if you'll let me. I want to show him what a real man looks like, what real love looks like." Vivienne squeezed his hand tightly. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time: genuine excitement about the future. The final chapter of Vivienne's transformation came 6 months later, when Julian made one last desperate attempt to assert control. According to whispers, his new wife had been pressuring him, complaining about finances, insisting he should get more money out of his crazy ex-wife. And so, Julian had filed a motion with the family court, requesting increased visitation and a reduction in alimony payments. The hearing was held in a small courtroom in Manhattan, far removed from the media frenzy of their high-profile divorce. Julian arrived with his 20-something bride, anxious, visibly uncomfortable in the solemn setting. Gone was the polished titan of industry. In his place stood a man diminished, smaller, his once powerful presence now marked by slouched shoulders and tired eyes. Vivienne came alone. She had told Lucia she wanted to do this herself. She had dressed with purpose: a navy-tailored suit, crisp white blouse, and her grandmother's pearls. Simple, powerful, and elegant. She looked every inch the woman she had become, a force of clarity and strength. And as she stepped into the courtroom, the contrast between her and the man who had once belittled her intelligence was staggering. The judge flipped through Julian's motion and then looked up, clearly unimpressed. "Mr. Langford, you're requesting more time with your son. However, our records show you've missed 40% of your supervised visits over the past 6 months. Can you explain this?" Julian fumbled with excuses. Business travel, schedule conflicts, adjustments. But even he didn't seem convinced by his own defense. Vivienne watched him, not with anger, but with pity. He had spent his life chasing status and wealth, never realizing the real treasure was slipping through his fingers. When the judge asked for her response, Vivienne stood with quiet composure. "Your Honor," she began, "I have no objection to Mr. Langford seeing our son, as long as the visits remain supervised. However," she turned to face Julian directly, "I do object to the characterization of our child as a burden. Leonardo is a bright, loving child. He deserves to be wanted, not tolerated. She took a breath. And as for the financial request, Mr. Langford received a generous settlement that allows him to live very comfortably. If he's experiencing financial hardship, perhaps he should evaluate his spending habits, rather than petition for funds allocated for our son's future. There was a beat of silence. Even the judge seemed to register the gravity of her words. Julian said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Vivian sat down, her back straight, her eyes forward, knowing, without a doubt, that the woman Julian had once underestimated had now outgrown him entirely. The judge's ruling was swift and unambiguous. Julian's visitation would remain supervised and unchanged. His financial obligations were increased slightly to account for inflation, and the judge warned that any future requests for modification would require a documented and consistent commitment to his parental responsibilities. As the courtroom emptied, Julian approached Vivian in the corridor, his steps hesitant. "Vivi," he said softly, using the nickname that once made her heart flutter. Now it stirred nothing but distant familiarity. Vivian turned, her expression unreadable. "What do you want, Julian?" I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes," he said, voice cracking. "I know I hurt you. I know I probably can't fix that. But I need you to know, I regret it. All of it. Every single choice." Vivian studied his face carefully, and for the first time she saw something that resembled genuine remorse. "I believe you do regret it," she replied, calm and clear. "But you don't regret hurting me. You regret the consequences of hurting me. There's a difference." Julian flinched. "Vivian, I loved you. I did. He shook his head. "The power, the money, the attention. It all went to my head. I started thinking I deserved more, that I was entitled to everything I wanted." "And what you wanted," Vivian finished quietly, "was a younger woman and a life without responsibility. I understand that now, but that's exactly why we can't go back. You didn't just betray me, Julian. You planned to take everything, my son's inheritance, his home, his future. You wanted to erase us so you could start fresh." She adjusted the strap of her bag and turned to leave. "I hope your new wife makes you happy. I truly do. And I hope you become a better father than you originally intended to be, for Leonardo's sake. But nothing about this conversation changes anything between us." Julian's voice followed her as she reached the courthouse steps. "Vivi, do you think you'll ever forgive me?" Vivian paused, turned back one last time. "I already have." Julian's eyes widened in surprise. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I trust you or want you in my life," she added. "It just means I'm not carrying the anger anymore. I'm too happy now to waste energy on resentment." And with that, Vivian Devereux walked out of Julian Langford's life forever, except for the twice-monthly visits where he would see his son and be reminded every single time of what he had so willingly thrown away. 6 months later, Vivienne and Alessandro were married in an intimate ceremony at her Tuscan villa, with 2-year-old Leonardo as their ring-bearer. The guest list was modest: family, close friends, and a few trusted colleagues. There were no paparazzi, no media coverage, no spectacle. Just a simple celebration of two people who had discovered something rarer than wealth or power: real love. As Vivian danced with Alessandro beneath twinkling string lights woven through the vineyard's pergolas, Leonardo slept soundly in Nana's arms nearby, the summer breeze rustling the olive trees around them. Vivian let her head rest gently on her husband's shoulder and breathed in the soft scent of jasmine and red wine on the air. For the first time in a long time, her heart was quiet. Not because there was nothing left to fight for, but because she had won. The woman who had once defined herself through her husband's image had become a force of nature in her own right. The mother who had once feared for her child's safety had built him a legacy rooted in strength and truth. Vivian Devereux Marchetti was living proof that sometimes the worst betrayals in life can become the greatest gifts, if you're strong enough to unwrap them, and brave enough to claim what's hidden inside. As she looked up at the Tuscan stars, hand in hand with a man who loved her exactly as she was, Vivian knew one thing for certain: her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. But the real story, Vivian's story, would last forever, so the story is over. Our wonderful friends, are you still here at this hour? If you're still with us now, then something in Vivian's journey has touched your heart, hasn't it? Maybe it was her strength, or that moment she stood alone in front of the world and said, "No more." Maybe it was the quiet resolve in her voice when she chose peace over vengeance. Whatever it was, let's take a moment, just you and me, to look at why this story matters beyond its glitter and drama. Vivienne's path was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming her voice. It's a story about choosing dignity over destruction, healing over hatred. As Viktor Frankl once said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That's what she did. She transformed pain into power. Maybe you've been through betrayal. Maybe you've had someone you love try to erase you. And maybe, just maybe, you've wondered if you could ever rise again. Let Vivienne's story remind you, you can. You're allowed to hurt. You're allowed to fall. But don't you dare stay down. You are not the version of yourself that someone else tried to define. You are not what was taken from you or who left you behind. You are what you choose to rebuild from the ashes. So if you're still here, still listening, thank you. You stayed for the whole truth. Now take it with you. Let it plant a seed. Let it remind you that even the most shattered hearts can rise, shine, and redefine their story. If this story gave you something, strength, hope, even just a pause in your day, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's spread more of this energy. Not just drama, but healing. Not just survival, but rebirth. You're not alone. You never were. And you too are just getting started.